They called me arrogant, too cocky, a kid with no chance in a league built for men. I remember the whispers, the laughter echoing from the stands, the way teammates rolled their eyes when I touched the ball. To them, I wasn't a player. I was a joke, a boy pretending to belong. Every mistake fed their cruelty, every miss confirmed their prophecy. But deep down, I knew something they didn't. This story wouldn't end the way they wanted. They thought they were watching my failure. They had no idea. They were witnessing the beginning of something that would silence the world. I wasn't supposed to be here. That's what they told me over and over until their voices became louder than my own. They said I was arrogant, too full of myself, too young to survive in a league built for giants. To them, I was nothing more than a skinny kid chasing a dream too heavy for my shoulders. And maybe, for a moment, I almost believed them. Maybe I almost let their laughter write the ending for me. But here's the truth. Sometimes the world needs to break you before it notices how much fire you're carrying inside. Every insult was fuel. Every mocking smile was a reason to train when no one was watching. And that's what this story is really about. Not the trophies, not the points, not even the glory. It's about what happens when you decide that no opinion, no judgment, no cruel laugh can define your worth. In the next hour, you're going to walk with me through the shadows I carried. The nights where I bled on empty courts, the battles I fought not just against opponents, but against my own doubts. You'll see the rise, the falls, the victories that silenced critics, and the ending no one was ready for. Because greatness is never handed to you. It's carved in pain, sharpened in humiliation, and revealed when the world least expects it. And maybe, as you hear my story, you'll see pieces of your own. Maybe you've been told you're too small, too weak, too arrogant, too different. Maybe people laughed at your dreams the same way they laughed at mine. If that's you, I want you to hold on, because what broke me became the very thing that made me unforgettable. So don't just watch. Be part of this journey. Hit that subscribe button right now, leave a like if you believe in proving people wrong, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, your country, your city, because this isn't just my story anymore, it's ours. A story that started with laughter and ended in silence. A story that will show you exactly why legends never die. I grew up in a place where dreams were treated like jokes. The court, where I first picked up a basketball, wasn't polished hardwood under bright lights. It was cracked concrete, broken hoops tied together with tape and rusted metal, a place where the ball echoed louder than the applause I never got. The air always smelled like sweat and dust, and the older kids laughed every time I tried to join. To them, I wasn't a player. I was just a kid with hands too small, legs too skinny, and a voice too quiet to ever matter. But when the sun went down and the streets emptied, that court became mine. I'd stay until the stars came out, dribbling until my fingers ached, shooting until my arms trembled, whispering to myself that one day this ball would take me somewhere no one believed I belonged. I didn't have crowds, I didn't have cheerleaders, I didn't even have teammates. What I had was silence, and in that silence I learned to listen to the voice that mattered most, the one inside me. At school, it was different. The laughter followed me through the hallways. Too cocky, they'd say when I walked in with my ball tucked under my arm. Too skinny, when I missed a shot during gym. Every failure was a reason for them to sneer. Teachers told me to focus on realistic dreams. Friends told me basketball wasn't for kids like me, but no matter what they said, I carried that ball everywhere, as if letting it go would mean letting go of the only piece of myself I trusted. The truth is, I wasn't born strong. I wasn't born tall. I wasn't even born confident. I was born stubborn. Every time they told me I couldn't, something inside me whispered, then I must. It wasn't arrogance, though. That's what they called it. It was survival. I remember one night standing alone on that cracked court, whispering into the dark, one day they'll see me. The ball hit the rim, bounced away, and I chased it again, breathless, refusing to quit. It wasn't about making the shot. It was about proving to myself that I would never stop chasing, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Greatness doesn't start in arenas. It starts in shadows, where no one claps, where no one believes, where the only spotlight is the one you imagine. And that's where my story truly began. I should have taken the safe path. That's what everyone told me. College first, they said. Learn the game. Grow up. Wait your turn. But patience was a language I never spoke. The shadows I had lived in for so long had shaped me into something restless, something hungry. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate. I declared for the league straight out of high school. The reaction was instant. Arrogant. Delusional. This kid doesn't respect the game. Reporters laughed into their microphones. Veterans rolled their eyes. Fans jeered. They said I was just a boy playing at being a man. My name didn't sound like a future star. It sounded like the punchline to a bad joke. Draft night should have been the greatest moment of my life. But as I stood there, shaking hands, smiling at the cameras, I could feel the weight of every sneer hidden behind polite applause. To them, I wasn't a miracle. I was a mistake, and mistakes in their world don't last long. My first practices were a battlefield. Veterans pushed me around, smirked when I missed shots, whispered under their breath when I walked past. Coaches gave me minutes like crumbs, barely enough to breathe on the court. I'd sit on the bench, heart pounding, begging for a chance to prove that I wasn't just hype. But when that chance came, it was worse. I rushed every shot, turned the ball over, slipped on defense. The crowd groaned, and I swear I could hear the words before they even left their mouths. Too young, too cocky, too small. Every mistake I made was fuel for their fire. The media had their headlines ready. The boy who skipped college skipped common sense too. Opponents circled me like wolves smelling blood. And my teammates? They treated me like dead weight, like a distraction that didn't belong in their league. But here's the truth no one saw. Humiliation wasn't killing me. It was feeding me. Every sneer, every shove, every groan from the crowd. It all piled up inside, turning into something sharper than pain, something closer to rage. I went home from practices with bruises I couldn't show, but instead of breaking, I locked myself in the gym at midnight, letting the ball echo off the hardwood like a promise. If they thought they could bury me under their doubt, they were wrong. They weren't burying me, they were planting me. Still, those first games cut deep. I could see the faces in the crowd, waiting for me to crumble. I could hear the laughter when my shots clanged off the rim. I knew that every headline the next morning would use my name as an example of wasted talent. And yet, I walked back onto that court, night after night, because I wasn't there to prove them right. I was there to make them eat their words. But the wolves weren't done. They smelled my fear, my mistakes, my inexperience, and they circled closer. And in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just a game. This was survival. And if I wanted to survive, I'd have to become something the wolves didn't expect. They didn't just doubt me, they hated me. And the worst part? I gave them reasons. Every time I stepped on the court, I carried the weight of their laughter, their doubts, their whispers. Instead of playing with patience, I tried to shut them up in one shot. I'd catch the ball, and before the play could even breathe, I'd fire it at the rim. Bricks, air balls, ugly misses. The crowd loved it. Every failure was proof that their prophecy was right. I was just an arrogant kid trying to steal a man's game. My teammates rolled their eyes every time I touched the ball. Some didn't even bother hiding their smirks. They called me selfish, said I was poisoning the team. The media ran with it, labeling me a ball hog, a problem child, a star who would never shine. And when they couldn't break me with words, they tried to break me with silence, locking me out of plays, freezing me out during games. But arrogance has another side. To them, it looked like ego. To me, it was defiance. I wasn't jacking up shots because I thought I was better than everyone. I was shooting because I refused to disappear. Because every time I let the ball go, it was my way of screaming back at a world that wanted me to vanish. Still, the label stuck. The arrogant kid. Fans chanted it. Reporters wrote it. Opponents used it to fuel their defense. And slowly, I began to wear it like armor. If they were going to call me cocky, I'd show them just how dangerous cocky could be. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. I wasn't celebrating. I was drowning. Nights alone in my apartment, lights off, phone buzzing with headlines about my failures. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if they were right. Maybe I had skipped steps I wasn't ready for. Maybe I was nothing more than a headline waiting to fade. And then there was him, the veteran, the superstar of our team, my so-called partner. He looked at me like I was a stain on his legacy, a kid stealing minutes that belonged to him. On the court, he barked orders. Off the court, he made sure everyone knew who was in charge. To him, I was competition where there should have been none. Our rivalry wasn't built on respect, it was built on fire and gasoline. Every practice turned into a silent war. Every game into a battle for touches, for space, for oxygen. The media fed it, fans fueled it. And before long, the story wasn't about our team winning. It was about whether the veteran would crush the arrogant kid before I could rise. They didn't understand. I wasn't trying to steal his crown. I was trying to build my own. And while the world laughed at my mistakes, I kept working. Every brick, every miss, every groan from the crowd, it all went back into the fire. Because deep down, I knew arrogance was just another word for belief. And belief, when sharpened enough, becomes dangerous. But the world wasn't finished testing me. The headlines grew harsher, the pressure heavier, the spotlight hotter. Every night felt like another chance to prove them wrong, or another chance to prove them right. And if I cracked even once, they'd bury me alive. The hardest part wasn't the booze. It wasn't the headlines that called me arrogant or the veterans that shoved me around. The hardest part was the silence after the game, when the lights went dark, when the crowd went home, when the echoes of laughter still lived in my ears. That's when it hurt the most. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling and hear their words again. Too young, too cocky, too arrogant, over and over, like a record that never stopped spinning. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I laced up my sneakers, grabbed the ball, and drove through the empty streets. The city was sleeping, I wasn't. I pulled up to the practice facility long after midnight. The doors were locked, the lights off. But I knew the janitor. He had seen me hanging around enough times. He looked at me with tired eyes, shook his head and muttered, "Kid, you're out of your mind." Still, he opened the door. Inside, it was just me and the shadows. The air was heavy, smelling of polish, dust and loneliness. The sound of the ball hitting the hardwood was louder than my heartbeat. Every dribble echoed like a question. Why are you here? Every shot was my answer, because I refused to quit. I ran the court back and forth, lungs tearing open, legs on fire. I shot until my arms burned, until blisters opened on my fingers, until the ball slipped through sweat-soaked hands. Every miss was punishment. Every make was redemption. I screamed into the empty rafters, the sound bouncing back to remind me that no one was watching, no one cared. But that didn't matter. Greatness isn't built under applause. It's built in silence when no one believes. Those nights became my ritual, midnight to sunrise. While the world slept, I bled. While the media tore me apart in the daylight, I sharpened myself in the dark. I trained until the floor was slick with sweat, until my shirt clung to me like a second skin, until I could barely walk to the locker room. The janitor would sometimes lean on his mop, shaking his head. "You're chasing ghosts, kid," he'd say. But I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was chasing the version of myself the world swore didn't exist. I remember one night in particular. My legs were gone, my arms useless, my body begging me to stop. I collapsed to my knees, palms flat against the hardwood. For a second, I thought about quitting, about letting their voices win. Then I heard it. Those whispers again, too young, too cocky, too arrogant. My head snapped up. I grabbed the ball with shaking hands and forced myself up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Not tonight, not ever. My teammates never saw this side of me. They only saw me dragging myself into practice exhausted, sweat dripping before warm-ups even started. To them, it looked like arrogance. They thought I wanted to outshine them. They never knew the truth. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I was trying to survive. Because every night I trained, I made a silent promise. One day the laughter would stop. One day the jeers would turn into applause. And when that day came, no one would say it was luck. They would know it was built in blood and sweat, in silence at midnight. There's a cost to obsession. I missed parties. I missed sleep. I missed being normal. But I didn't care. Normal kids didn't belong in this league. Normal kids weren't mocked by thousands. Normal kids weren't told they would fail before they ever began. I wasn't normal, and I didn't want to be. Those lonely nights forged me. They stripped me down to nothing, then rebuilt me into someone who could face the wolves with a straight stare. The arrogance they hated. It was just defiance in disguise. And the obsession they never saw, that was the weapon I was building. When I looked at myself in the mirror after those sessions, shirt clinging, hands blistered, eyes bloodshot, I didn't see a kid anymore. I saw something harder, sharper. I saw the shadow of the man I was becoming. And that's when I realized I wasn't training just to prove them wrong. I was training to make them regret ever doubting me. When the league looked at me, they didn't see a future. They saw a mistake. But standing across from me in that same locker room was a man they all believed in. He was already a star, a mountain of strength, the kind of player who could bend games to his will. The veteran, my opposite in every way. Where I was skinny and raw, he was built like a giant. Where I stumbled, he dominated. Where I was doubted, he was worshipped. They said I didn't belong. But suddenly I was paired with him. At first it felt like oil and fire. He didn't trust me. He barked at me in practice, shook his head when I missed, and sometimes refused to even look my way. To him, I was a distraction, a boy pretending to be a man. The media framed it perfectly. The star and the kid who thinks he's won. But something happened on the court. The first time he drew a double team and I slipped free, the ball found my hands. Instinct took over. I hit the shot. The crowd roared, but it wasn't for me. It was for the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could be useful. And that was enough. The more we played, the more I learned. His dominance created cracks in defenses, and I slipped through them like smoke. My speed, my hunger, my arrogance, they weren't flaws anymore. They were weapons that fit perfectly beside his power. Together, we were chaos. He tore defenses apart, and I finished what he started. Or sometimes, when he grew tired, I lit the spark myself. The wins came fast. Titles followed. Suddenly, the boy who was supposed to fail was part of something unstoppable. The media stopped laughing. The fans stopped booing. The same voices that called me arrogant now called me fearless. They didn't know the difference, but I did. For a while, it felt like the world had finally silenced itself. Every night we stepped on the court, it wasn't just a game, it was destruction. We made grown men look helpless. We silenced arenas city by city. We turned doubt into dust. But power has a price. Behind the celebrations, the tension grew. He was the face, the giant, the king of our dynasty. And me? I was still the kid. Every headline credited him. Every magazine cover put him front and center. My name came second. My story came last. And I hated it. The same fire that fueled me in those midnight gyms burned hotter with every game. I didn't want to be his sidekick. I didn't want to live in his shadow. We were winning together, yes, but I wanted more. I wanted to prove that I could lead, that I could carry the weight without him. Our partnership became a storm. We'd walk into games with smiles, but in the locker room, words turned sharp. He called me selfish. I called him soft. He said I didn't respect him. I said he didn't respect the game. And through it all, we kept winning because the court didn't care about our hatred. It only cared about results. But hatred has a way of growing. The world saw a duo destined for greatness. Behind closed doors, we were sparks waiting for gasoline. And I knew sooner or later something would break. Winning is supposed to fix everything. That's what people on the outside believe. They look at the trophies, the confetti, the parades through the streets, and they think victory erases pain. They don't realize that winning doesn't heal. It only hides. And the more we won, the deeper the cracks beneath us grew. At first, it was intoxicating. Every season ended with champagne in the locker room, rings on our fingers, cameras flashing like lightning. The world called us a dynasty. They said no one could stop us, and every time we lifted another trophy, I smiled. But behind that smile was fire, burning hotter with every celebration. Because no matter how much we won, he was always the king, the giant, the face of the dynasty. When they spoke about our victories, his name came first. The covers of magazines showed his grin, not mine. Interviews praised his dominance, while I was called promising, talented, or worse, his sidekick. I hated that word more than any insult the crowd had ever thrown at me. It wasn't just the media. Even inside the locker room, the atmosphere changed. Teammates leaned toward him when they spoke, followed his lead, treated me like a rebellious little brother instead of an equal. And maybe that would have been enough for some players, to be the number 2, to ride the coattails of a superstar, but not me. I wasn't built to live in anyone's shadow. The tension grew heavier with each banner we hung. Practices turned brutal. He'd shove me harder than necessary, daring me to push back. I did. Coaches stepped in, but the damage was already done. We weren't teammates anymore. We were rivals wearing the same jersey. The media smelled blood. Headlines screamed, "Is the dynasty breaking apart?" Talk shows picked sides. Team him or team me. Fans argued in bars, in living rooms, even in the arenas while we played. And the more they fueled it, the more the fire burned. I remember one championship parade. The streets were lined with fans screaming our names, confetti falling like golden rain. He held the trophy above his head, soaking in the love, while I stood beside him clapping, smiling for the cameras. But inside, I was screaming. That trophy didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to both of us, yet the world only saw him. The breaking point came during a regular season game. We were winning easily, but every possession, he kept the ball. He froze me out, ignored me, as if to prove he didn't need me. The crowd cheered his every basket, while I stood on the court, fists clenched, heart pounding with rage. By the final buzzer, the scoreboard said victory, but in the locker room, war broke out. Words cut deeper than any shove ever could. He called me selfish. I called him overrated. He said I'd never win without him. I told him the dynasty was only alive because of me. Teammates tried to calm us, coaches begged us to cool down, but some things can't be undone. Respect shattered. The bond was gone. The front office was forced to make a decision. The world thought it would be me who left. After all, he was the proven giant, the veteran, the champion. I was still the arrogant kid, but in the end, it was him who walked away. The dynasty cracked in half, and suddenly the throne was empty. The news shook the league. Commentators said we'd never be the same. Rivals smiled, believing our reign was finally over. Fans cried, saying the greatest duo in the game had been destroyed by ego. And maybe they were right. Maybe ego had burned it all to the ground. But deep down, I felt something different. For the first time, I wasn't the kid in the shadow. For the first time, I wasn't anyone's sidekick. I was alone. And that meant I had the chance to prove myself in a way I never could beside him. Of course, the whispers returned. He can't do it without the giant. The dynasty died with him. Now the kid will finally be exposed. I heard it all, the same way I'd always heard it, but I didn't run from it. I let it fuel me, because legends aren't built by clinging to someone else's crown. Legends are built when you step into the fire and face the world alone, and that's exactly where I was standing. When he left, they didn't cheer for me. They didn't say, "Now it's your turn." No, what they said was, "It's over." The dynasty was dead, and I was just the leftover piece. The sidekick without a partner, the arrogant kid who had finally lost his shield. Reporters swarmed me with questions I already knew the answers to. Can you win on your own? Was it really you, or was it all him? Talk shows laughed, analysts shook their heads, and rivals rubbed their hands together, eager to bury me alive. They didn't just doubt me, they were certain I would fail. And maybe, for a moment, I almost believed them. The first games without him felt like walking into battle naked. Defenses that used to break under his strength now closed in on me. Every possession felt like a test, every miss like confirmation that I was nothing without him. Fans who once chanted my name now booed when I bricked shots. Opponents trash-talked louder, reminding me I was no king. At night, I'd sit alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights. The silence felt heavier than ever. The dynasty had been my shield, my proof, my validation. Without it, I was exposed, vulnerable, alone. But loneliness has a strange way of forcing you to decide who you are. So I went back to the one place that never lied, the empty gym. Midnight sessions became 2-a-days. 2-a-days became 3. I studied film until my eyes burned, memorizing the movements of every defender, every weakness I could exploit. I broke down my game piece by piece, stripping away everything that made me predictable, building new weapons from the ground up. If they thought I couldn't win without him, I would make sure I never needed anyone again. The pressure only grew. Headlines painted me as the villain, the selfish one who had destroyed the dynasty. Crowds booed louder, critics sharpened their knives, and every bad game was proof that their prophecy was coming true. But instead of breaking me, it pushed me deeper into the fire. Because I realized something important. I'd been here before, the cracked concrete courts, the laughter of older kids, the whispers that I didn't belong. This wasn't new. This was my life, and if I survived then, I could survive now. The next season was brutal. Every night felt like a fight against the entire league. Some games I carried the team alone, scoring until my lungs burned. Other nights I collapsed under the weight, sitting in the locker room drenched in sweat, listening to the silence of teammates who still weren't sure I was the leader they needed. But no matter how heavy it felt, I kept walking back onto that court. Because the truth was simple. I wasn't playing just to win games. I was playing to rewrite history. I knew what the world was waiting for. They wanted me to fail. They wanted proof that the arrogant kid couldn't grow into a man, and for a while they almost got it. But the thing about being alone is this: it strips you bare, burns away the noise, and forces you to find out what's really inside. And inside me, there was still fire. The world thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. Some nights are just games, others become history. And then there are nights that turn into something greater, something that burns itself into the soul of everyone who witnessed it. For me, that night came when the world least expected it. The critics had been circling for months. They said I couldn't carry a team. They said I'd collapse without him, that my arrogance had finally been exposed. Every headline, every TV segment, every smirk from an opponent fed the fire inside me. I didn't just want to win anymore. I wanted to silence them in a way they could never forget. The arena that night was buzzing with the usual noise, fans cheering, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling notes they thought they'd publish tomorrow. But as I laced up, I felt something different. My hands were steady, my chest calm. It wasn't nerves, it wasn't fear, it was certainty. From the opening tip I attacked, the first shot swished clean, the net snapping like a whip, then another and another. Defenders tightened, but it didn't matter. I was moving faster, sharper, deadlier than I ever had before. Every dribble was precise, every cut a knife. The crowd leaned forward, sensing something was coming. By halftime, I had more points than some players scored in a week. Teammates stared at me wide-eyed, as if they'd never seen me before. Coaches didn't dare pull me out. Even opponents, frustrated and desperate, shook their heads in disbelief. The arena wasn't watching a kid anymore. They were watching a storm. The second half was madness. Double teams collapsed and I split them apart. Hands smacked at the ball, but I slipped through. Every shot I took felt destined. Every basket another nail in the coffin of every critic who had ever called me a fraud. The crowd's noise rose with every score, from cheers to roars to something almost primal. And still I kept going. 40 points, 50, 60. The number climbed, and with it, the disbelief. The announcers' voices cracked with excitement, repeating my name over and over, as if saying it enough times would make it real. But it was real. When the final buzzer sounded, I looked up at the scoreboard. 81 points. My name burned on the screen like fire. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were standing, screaming, chanting the name they once mocked. Opponents hung their heads. Teammates surrounded me in awe. For a moment I just stood there, drenched in sweat, staring into the sea of faces. And I realized something. This wasn't just a game. This was revenge. This was validation. This was proof that every midnight session, every insult, every cruel word had been fuel for this moment. The critics couldn't take it back. The fans couldn't forget it. History couldn't erase it. 81 wasn't just a number, it was my answer. And yet even as I stood there, chest heaving, heart pounding, I knew something darker. The world would cheer now. They would call me unstoppable. But their praise wasn't love, it was convenience. They would build me up only to tear me down again when it suited them. And I couldn't let myself forget that. Still, that night was mine. The boy they laughed at, the kid they mocked, the arrogant mistake who was supposed to fail, he had just carved his name into eternity. 81 proved I could stand alone. But greatness isn't measured in single nights, no matter how historic. Legends are built in June, when the lights burn brighter, when the pressure suffocates, when banners are raised. And that was the question still haunting me. Could I carry a team to the throne without him? The whispers didn't die after that game. If anything, they grew sharper. Sure, he can score, but he can't lead. Stats don't win titles. He'll burn himself out before he ever sees another ring. They said I was chasing numbers, not championships. They said I was still selfish, still arrogant, still the same kid who had nearly destroyed the dynasty. I let them talk. Because deep down, I knew the only answer that mattered was still out there. The climb back to the finals wasn't glamorous, it was brutal. I dragged my body through games where nothing came easy. Nights where my shot was cold, I forced myself to defend harder. Games where my legs were gone, I pushed my voice louder, pulling teammates with me. Leadership isn't about smiling in press conferences, it's about bleeding in the trenches when no one else will. Slowly, something shifted. My teammates, the ones who had once looked at me with doubt, began to follow. They saw me take the hits, the bruises, the exhaustion, and refuse to quit. They saw me scream at them not out of arrogance, but out of desperation to win. And little by little the team transformed. No longer fragments orbiting around a giant. We became a unit. By the time we reached the finals, the whispers had turned into silence. The analysts still doubted, the fans still questioned, but I didn't care. I was back where I belonged, under the brightest lights with everything on the line. The series was war. Every possession felt like a lifetime. I was doubled, tripled, shoved to the ground, but I kept coming back. My body screamed, my lungs burned, but my will didn't break. Every shot I made wasn't just points, it was defiance. Every defensive stand wasn't just effort, it was proof. Game after game, the pressure mounted. Rivals sneered, the media speculated, fans held their breath. And then came the final night. The scoreboard tight, the arena trembling, the season balancing on a knife's edge. I remember the silence in that timeout huddle. Teammates staring at me, eyes wide, waiting. For the first time, they weren't looking past me. They weren't searching for someone else. They were looking at me as their leader. I stood, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, and I realized this was the moment. This was the chance to rewrite everything. The last minutes blurred into chaos. Shots fell, bodies collided, the clock drained. And when the buzzer finally screamed, I stood in the center of the court, arms raised, confetti raining down. We had done it. I had done it. The boy they said couldn't win without a giant had just reclaimed the throne. I looked up into the stands and saw fans crying, screaming, chanting my name. The same people who once mocked me now celebrated me. Reporters shoved cameras in my face, asking how it felt. But words couldn't capture it. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was vindication. The whispers had been wrong. The dynasty didn't die. It had been reborn. And this time the crown was mine, the throne was mine, but thrones never last forever. My body was proof of that. Years of battles, of midnight sessions, of dragging teams through fire and smoke had left scars no one could see. My knees ached with every step. My back screamed when I got out of bed. My shoulders burned after every practice. The fans saw highlight reels. What they didn't see was me sitting in ice baths until midnight, or struggling to climb stairs when the cameras weren't around. The whispers changed tone. They no longer said I couldn't win. They said I was finished, too old, too broken, past my prime. They said I was just another legend who didn't know when to walk away. Every time I limped off the court, their voices grew louder. He's done. He should retire before he embarrasses himself. But I wasn't ready to fade quietly. I remembered the boy on the cracked court, dribbling until his hands bled. I remembered the laughter, the humiliation, the arrogance they hated. That boy hadn't fought his way here just to bow out when the world told him to. I had one last fire left inside me, and I wasn't going to let it die in silence. The final season became a war between my body and my will. Every game was agony. Painkillers dulled the edge, but never erased it. Trainers wrapped my legs so tight I could barely feel them. Teammates tried to carry me, but I refused to stop fighting. If my body was breaking, I would break it on my own terms. And then came the farewell game. The last time I would lace up under those lights. The arena was packed. Fans who once mocked me now begged for one last glimpse of greatness. Cameras filled every corner. Opponents whispered that it would be a mercy night, a soft ending for a fading star. They didn't understand. Mercy was never in my vocabulary. From the opening whistle, I attacked. My body screamed, but my spirit roared louder. Shot after shot, the ball found the net. The crowd rose with every basket, the noise swelling like a wave crashing over me. Teammates kept feeding me the ball, almost in disbelief at what they were watching. 30 points, 40, 50, each number higher than anyone thought possible for a body as broken as mine. Sweat poured, legs trembled, but I refused to stop. This wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about proving that fire burns brightest when it's about to go out. By the time the clock wound down, I had scored 60 points on my final night. The arena shook with applause, fans crying, chanting my name like a hymn. Opponents hugged me, teammates lifted me, and I stood in the center of it all, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, chest heaving, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I looked into the crowd and saw faces I'd never forget. Fathers holding sons, mothers wiping tears, strangers hugging strangers. They weren't cheering for a player anymore. They were cheering for a story of arrogance turned to resilience, of doubt turned to fire, of endings turned into legacies. As I walked off the court, every step heavy but sure, I knew this was the last time. The jersey clung to my skin, the sweat soaking it like armor, the roar of the crowd following me into the tunnel. My body was done, but my fire was eternal. Because legends don't end when the clock runs out. They end when the fire inside them refuses to die. And mine had just burned brighter than ever. After the farewell fire, I thought I had written the final chapter. 60 points in my last game, a crowd chanting my name, confetti falling like gold. It felt perfect, too perfect. I told myself the story was complete. But life doesn't respect perfect endings. It always finds a way to remind you that nothing is ever finished. Retirement gave me something I'd never had before: silence. For years, my days were measured in practices, flights, arenas, noise. Now I woke up to quiet mornings. No alarms screaming at dawn, no reporters waiting outside, just my family, breakfast with my daughters, long drives with music instead of scouting reports, evenings filled with laughter instead of film study. For the first time, I wasn't chasing numbers. I was chasing moments. I built businesses, mentored the next generation, wrote stories, gave speeches. The world saw me as a man who had conquered the game and then gracefully stepped away. But my greatest pride wasn't in the trophies. It was in watching my daughter lace up her sneakers, fire in her eyes, her dreams stretching higher than the rim. She wanted to carry the game forward, not because of my shadow, but because of her own light. That filled me with a joy I never felt even on the brightest courts. And then that day came. It wasn't a game. It wasn't an arena. It was just life. A trip, a journey with my little girl. A simple morning that should have been ordinary. But fate doesn't care about ordinary. It doesn't care about timing or fairness or how many battles you've already survived. Fate arrives without warning, and when it does, it changes everything. The world stopped. News anchors broke down on live television. Fans gathered in the streets, holding candles, holding jerseys, holding each other. Artists painted murals overnight, faces streaked with tears as spray cans hissed against concrete walls. In cities across the world, people who had never met me sobbed as if they'd lost family. Teammates who once clashed with me cried openly. Opponents who once hated me released tributes in disbelief. Reporters who once mocked me struggled to find words. Arenas became cathedrals of silence. Crowds stood together, heads bowed, while a single spotlight shone on an empty jersey resting at center court. Players wept before games, referees held back tears, fans lit up arenas with phones like constellations. The world had booed me once. Now, for the first time, there were no boos at all, only grief. I wasn't there to see it, but I can imagine it. Millions of people who had never agreed on anything before, united in the same silence. For one moment, borders didn't matter. Colors didn't matter. Teams didn't matter. All that mattered was that something larger than basketball had been lost. And in that silence, they finally understood. It had never been about arrogance. It had never been about selfishness. It had been about fire, about refusing to accept limits, about carrying humiliation, rejection, and pain like a torch until it burned bright enough to light the way for others. Death didn't erase what I had built. It revealed it. The boy they mocked, the kid they laughed at, the arrogant mistake they swore would fail. He had become a legend they couldn't let go of. In life, I fought for respect. In death, I was given something heavier, immortality. Because when the world weeps for you, it means your story no longer belongs to you, it belongs to them. They thought my story ended the day the world fell silent, that the final whistle had been blown, that the book was closed. But legends don't live in scoreboards or banners. They live in people, and people don't forget. In the weeks after my fall, the grief turned into something else. In every city, murals appeared. My face, my jersey, my words painted 10 feet high. Children stood in front of them holding basketballs too big for their hands, eyes wide with the same hunger I once carried. Candles flickered at makeshift memorials outside arenas where strangers gathered not to mourn alone, but to remind each other that fire doesn't die, it spreads. I became a lesson. Coaches told players my story not just to inspire greatness, but to remind them that arrogance can be defiance, that obsession can be survival, that pain can be transformed into fuel. Young boys and girls whispered my mantra under their breath before taking shots in empty gyms. Mamba mentality. It wasn't about me anymore, it was about them, about everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough and who now had proof that limits are nothing but lies. The rivals who once hated me told their children about the battles we fought. Teammates who once clashed with me spoke about the fire I carried. Fans who once booed me kept my jersey like a relic, wearing it proudly as if to apologize for the nights they doubted. Even critics, those who built careers tearing me down, found themselves admitting that they had never seen anyone like me and never would again. And my daughter, she carried more than my name. She carried the spark. Every time she stepped onto a court, every time she smiled through the pressure, every time she looked up at the rim with fearless eyes, she reminded the world that the story wasn't over, that legacy is not measured in years lived, but in hearts ignited. That's why I say this: legends don't die. They echo, they ripple outward. They burn brighter in others than they ever did in themselves. The boy they mocked, the arrogant kid, the selfish star, the broken veteran, he was never the ending. He was just the beginning, because the true victory isn't the trophies I lifted or the banners I left behind. The true victory is every child who picks up a ball today and believes they can rewrite their own story. The true victory is every person who remembers that even when the world laughs, you fight. Even when they doubt, you rise. Even when they silence you, you burn brighter. I may have fallen, but the fire never did. And so this is where the story leaves me. Not in a box score, not in the roar of an arena, but in the silence that came after. They called me arrogant. They called me cocky. They called me a kid with no chance. And maybe they were right, until they weren't. Because arrogance became defiance, defiance became obsession, and obsession became a legacy. I didn't live forever, but my fire did. It lives in the murals painted on cracked city walls. It lives in the children dribbling until their hands ache. It lives in every person who dares to believe they can rise when the world laughs at them. That's the lesson I leave behind. Greatness isn't about being loved. It's about refusing to quit when you're hated. So if this story moved you, subscribe now, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs this fire. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, your country, your city. Because no matter where you are, remember this: they can doubt you, they can mock you, they can even silence you. But legends never really die.